Hello every folks, and good morning. Alright, time to talk about more obscure mechanics and weird design decisions for Tactics Ogre here. So there's one, well, I say there's one thing, there's quite a few mechanics that kind of went back when I was first getting into the game, honestly put me off of it for quite a long time. And in fact, I mean, kind of in the background of my head, I always like to think that this game kind of functions, well, a bit like certain pieces of art. And I know that's kind of a generic thing in terms of, oh, you know, games are art, that kind of business. But, I mean, in terms of the actual process of kind of how this game ends up making sense, it's very similar to, you know, some older movies that, you know, maybe didn't get appreciated in their time, or in many cases ones that ended up getting liked but didn't necessarily end up getting a lot of their stuff discovered for years. And this is one of those cases where, yeah, like it seems like every week some new mechanic, you know, some crazy obscure thing is discovered. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about some of the basic stuff today, though, like some of the stuff that when originally going into it just honestly seemed very odd, seemed like it was trying to cater to a casual audience, that kind of thing. Because surprisingly, this game, okay, so I will say it's designed in a very unusual way. They legitimately expect you to go through the story once having no clue what you're doing, but then just stick to your save file and then just keep going through it over and over and over and over. It's weirdly enough a game that deeply discourages you from 100%ing it, but very heavily encourages you to at least try 95%ing it, if that makes sense. So your first time through, you may, you may look around and, yeah, you see that the AI is not exactly running upgraded gear. They're not exactly running their full skill sets or anything like that. And, I mean, we discussed a lot of this in the post-game thing before. But this actually kind of comes to a head with one of the mechanics that you typically don't see come up too often. And also tends to be one of those things that, I know personally this just annoyed me going into it. But, okay, let's talk about the lives for a minute. So, this is kind of a bit of a long story here, but okay, let's look at how the lives evolved throughout these games, because one thing you notice, looking through a lot of, like, Mitsuno projects and things like that, there tended to be a whole lot of, like, okay, this idea worked, oh crap, that one didn't, let's just try something completely different kind of situations. So when they started off with Ogre Battle there, your characters were functionally immortal. Like, when their health went down to 0, they got knocked out. If it was a squad leader that got knocked out, that squad would retreat. But yeah, beyond that, as soon as you actually cleared a map, you were good to go. You could just go right back to it. So all well and good, you know. You could say, hey, you get all your health back at the end of fights and, you know, the rest of the series too. But, well, I mean, for the most part. But just point being, you know, there really wasn't any kind of permadeath kind of thing. And when they were going back, they had said in interviews, they're like, okay, we want to create more personal drama. And what creates personal drama more than the potential for imminent death around every corner? And so they had the SNES version, where everybody could just go get killed off by a random unfortunate crit. Now, the weird thing was, this created a situation where people played very defensively, and I don't know if any folks watching this might have looked at the development of Bloodborne, and I know, random it seems, but they had a saying during that one that I think summed it up pretty well. Like, you know, teaching your players to play defensively is all well and good unless it engenders passivity, which is exactly what ended up happening. I'm pretty sure most folks had that experience where they build, you know, their well-rounded team for the original SNES version. They've got their frontliners, they've got their backliners, and then by the end of the game, they're like, yeah, we're running archers and wizards. That frontline mess is just no. I mean, with exception of Habrim, because he just runs up and turns everything to stone. So yeah. Which, by the way, I don't remember if I covered this before, but if you're ever wondering, Stone Bloom, yeah, that's why he's got to petrify as his first finisher, because, yeah. He used to, like, right off the bat, as soon as you hired him in the SNES version, he would have 100% chance to petrify, because his agility was really high, and I believe the odds of petrify actually hitting scaled off agility or something like that, it was one of those weird things where, yeah, he was made to be fast. Turning somebody to stone is apparently a very fast process. Anywho, moving on. And how does this relate to the lives, you know? Okay, so you had people generally avoiding using frontliners. I mean, you look at a lot of, a lot of tier lists and things like that, or, I mean, they don't make as many tier lists for this one as they used to. They're definitely not the same thing. When I'm referring to tier lists on this one, it's mostly going to be like old guides from back in the day, and you generally see a whole lot of like, yeah, frontliners are kind of, maybe don't use those. Unless you have some of the dedicated ones, like maybe Hobrim, but you want to use them for Petrify, or you have the White Knights. You know, they're pretty tanky, but even they will end up getting taken out pretty easily. Just because in general, it kind of came down to if your frontliner can get the kill, they're good. They can do a little bit more damage, but yeah, realistically, they're less likely to hit, they're forced to take a hit in return, and they got to get up close. So it was just a harsh time for them. So that was obviously one of the things to address, and one of those particular issues were if you miscalculated it, which ended up happening in, you know, more often than not, quite frankly, you would usually end up losing those frontliners. So this created a situation where people generally avoided, you know, charging in at any point. It was just plink away from the distance, or from a distance, and just kind of do the damage you can and hope for the best. Which was awesome in the case of things like Lindell here, which is probably why you were limited to about 3 of them in the entire game. It's funny because in every one of these games, there's certain classes that they limit you to like 2 or 3. There's always at least a couple of them. Like it's usually liches and something else. It was liches and gunners in the SNES one. Because yeah, if you didn't know, if you turned somebody into a gunner in that one, it would basically be a permanent change. And their actual specialty weapon, there was only a grand total of like either 4 or 5 in the entire game. And in order to get one of them, you had to intentionally get Kashua killed after rescuing her. So yeah, and by the way, that particular side quest, if you didn't know about it, it still exists. You just have to go really far out of your way to get it, and all you get is a commander gun. So that's one of these right here. It's basically your upgraded muskets. It's the best of your standard guns. What am I looking over here for? So it's this thing right here. Not exactly mind-blowing, but you get an extra one of those. Realistically, if you picked up the book, you can just make those things. But if you didn't know how to get it, yeah, after you end up rescuing Kashua, she just has to die on the road back, and then they go back to the castle. They're like, "You've rescued her, what happened?" And he's just there looking awkwardly at the table like, I wanted my shotgun." And you might be saying, wait a minute, that's clearly a rifle. In the original, it was called a shotgun. I'm getting really off track on the whole lives mechanic here, so let's get back to it. Alright, so frontliners, yeah, we're pretty heavily discouraged in that one, despite the fact that so many of the enemy squads used frontliners all the dang time. And in many cases, they ended up having boosted stats, so they ended up being stronger. I mean, there were exceptions, like when you had your denim here and stuff like that, if you had them running around, you know, as a lord or something like that, with a friggin' like 2 elemental swords or something, you were usually pretty well and solid. I've seen somebody solo Palace of the Dead with just denim before. It's doable. It kind of comes down to that same almost XCOM-esque Alpha Strike building kind of situation. I mean, you had some exceptions like spears, because, I mean, you could just poke from a distance, but then you were dealing with reduced damage. Anyway, so then they get to FFT after all this, and they're like, okay, so how do we fix that? Well, let's try out this bleed-out timer thing. We need some kind of, you know, we need the option for somebody to get knocked out, but then get raised right back up. Because in the SNES version, if you gave them a Blessing Stone, they would come back to life, but really, as far as that and the Revive spell, that was all you had. Actually, yeah, let's take one step back to cover one more thing about Ogre SNES, which was the Revive mechanic. Because technically, you could bring them back to life. You could either bring them back as zombies, or, well, they still have to be living. There's this whole weird, like, loop where you could turn somebody back to level 1 as a zombie, turn them back to normal, raise them back up again, turn them into just god characters. But in the case of that Revive mechanic, though, that's a spell you got later in the game. It was implemented really, really badly, all things considered, because you basically either had to have a magic leaf on you, or you just sat there for about 8 turns in a row, whenever somebody that you cared about got killed off, just sitting and waiting for that thing to recharge, because you know as soon as you end the fight, you're not getting that character back. So you just gotta sit there and wait until it recharges, and then hopefully that, you know, the other guy doesn't get their turn right away and snipe them or something. So it was slow and it was annoying to do it that way. I mean, it kind of makes sense if you're doing like a tabletop type situation, but in terms of overall gameplay, it was not great. So yeah, FFT comes along, and in that case it gets arguably even worse, because their whole thought is, okay, we need to make sure that they aren't getting killed off instantly. So okay, the bleed out mechanic works, but they put so many revive moves out there that you're left with this whole sandbagging situation, as it's called, where people are getting knocked out over and over and over, and you revive and you heal up, and then you lose somebody else, and then you revive and you heal up, and you're basically letting people die to tank damage, just leaving them at low health and low defense. Well, I mean, you didn't really have armor in that game, but anyway, you leave them at low health, and just somebody comes in with their big hit move, knocks them out. And so that's not exactly great either. So, need some way to address that, need some way to go and make more of that mechanic. So, okay, you got Vagrant Story with all of its own takes. Like, Vagrant Story, I would say, had more of an effect on the buffs. But okay, so when they were doing this one, you can tell they wholesale copied the bleed out mechanic. However, when it came to the live system, it seems kind of strange, because you might be thinking, like, wait, this used to be like death instantly. Now this is a double-layered redundant system. What the hell is that? Why would this matter? And what's interesting is I think I know why it's in there. So obviously they wanted more people to use Frontliners. I mean, Frontliners are beefed across the board on this one. Yes, archers are really dang strong, but it has to be noted that yeah, if you think about it, the archers in this game are not as strong as they seem on paper. They do a lot of damage, but you know what? If we look at, like, endgame bows and things like that... Actually, this isn't really an endgame bow, but okay. You see what this says right over here? 5 to 8. Their movement range is 3. So, basically, if you look at this combination, most of the Frontliners have access to... where was it here? I guess I don't have it on her. So... Okay, let's go down here. Probably should have had this pulled up a little bit sooner, huh? So most of them will have access to Rampart Aura. For those unfamiliar, basically this means that anybody within, X amount of tiles, depending on what the rank is, if they end up hitting those tiles, the enemy unit takes -1 movement, or just gets stopped entirely on that tile. It depends entirely on what their skill loadout is. Some characters lose some movement and have to move and have the ability to move through it. Other characters will be stopped by it entirely. So this means that the archer's only choice, if one of these were to get close, is usually going to be to run away. If they get up to Rampart Aura 3, this means they don't even have the option to run away. They literally can do absolutely nothing but shield bash or punch the guy, which you may have seen before. You may have seen the AI panic and run up and try to punch you, and you might be thinking, like, wow, the AI is just really stupid. No, they legitimately have no other choice. Like, archers in general are hard countered by so many things, and like even stuff like rogues or whatever else, getting in close with a knife, they would be able to hard counter them too, because if they get close, they've only got a movement range of 3. They cannot move out to their bow's effective range. Crossbow users have it a little bit better, but they're generally a bit weaker in this one. So it's it's kind of a cool idea. You can tell what they were going for. Is it perfectly balanced or anything? No, but pretty much every part of this game seems to have been balanced against its own existing mechanics more than trying to really adopt any, norms, so to speak. I mean, you still have to consider this is an 11-year-old game. All things considered, like, even comparing it to some more modern ones, these whole systems here are shockingly elegant. Anyway, back to it on this whole live system, though. So why does that matter? Well, you're already making Frontliners better. You're already making them better across the board, so they've got an excuse to run up and be used anyway. You've got parry and deflect to make sure that they actually can potentially fight stuff off that way. You've got stuff like dodge put in there, so that you can actually make dedicated dodge builds and things. You have all kinds of different defensive moves all over the place. You can have somebody specifically specialize in just reducing damage with Fortify and Resistance. Who do I have Fortify on? There we go, as an example. And basically, you're just able to constantly stack all of these things to sort of force the build that you want to build. So, okay, Frontliners are already better, but they get close. They still will get knocked out every now and then. And it's incredibly annoying, like, especially if we take a look at something like FFT, where one random crit could potentially, get rid of your one reviving guy that was on the team. This one's personally fresh in my mind as of yesterday because I was setting up an onion run in War of the Lions, and like right as I end up unlocking the class for everybody after like 20 minutes of grinding out the same fight, I get into a situation where the one guy that still has access to revives, because I was just kind of rushing through it, ends up getting knocked out by an unlucky crit. It was basically like a counter that hit against all odds with an unlucky crit on top. And sure enough, the entire thing ends up going completely haywire because this chicken's just running around healing itself over and over. So, incredibly annoying to have that kind of stuff happen, and so instead what they decided with this one was, okay, if you manage to, for lack of a better term, utterly fuck up, then you have this thing over here that tells you, okay, this is how many times you've messed up. You will remember this, but you haven't lost your unit. If they're dead, you can't actually transfer their skills over to somebody else, so they even thought of that one as well, so you still have the crystal mechanic that ended up getting moved into this one as well. However, those particular skills, they only keep the actual ranks that you've achieved. You don't really get your current experience transferred over or anything like that. So it basically allows you to keep the milestones you've achieved without really keeping everything. Obviously, it doesn't really keep base stats and things like that. So you're still losing that guy. It still hurts. And funnily enough, you still in many cases would be better off hiring somebody just kind of out in the wild. But you know, you could see it coming. It was definitely your fault, more or less. Yeah, you might be saying those cases where you had somebody knocked off a cliff. Like I know this particular save file. I'll always remember the one dude that ended up dying in this campaign far more than any of the others, because this was just a generic dragoon that I'd started the game with that got slapped off a cliff in Hanging Gardens. And just yeah, it's interesting. Because they even keep a little counter for like, hey, if you were playing the original, this is how many would have died. So would have lost 343 units. That's up there. Now, I was mentioning earlier that it seems a little weird that this game's designed to play over and over and over and over and over. So if you haven't seen the post-game thing, if you didn't know, once you get to the end here and why this lives mechanic plays a bit of a longer-term role here. Once you get to the end of the game, that's not even close to the end of the game. It's basically designed so that you go back and you experience it over and over. So you go back in your like New Game Plus type situations, you see all kinds of new fights. Not necessarily new fights in terms of, in terms of like entirely new maps or things like that. There are plenty of new maps, but I mean things like we'll see right here, where you're actually going in with your proper stuff, and you're not going into Curb Stomp, you're going into, just continue on the story. The game's actually taking you seriously now. Actually, I think we'll go ahead and replace Donnie here with Kashua. But yeah, so the game turns on serious mode. It actually bothers to give everybody their proper equipment this time around. You can actually accomplish this in the game normally as well by just reaching level 25 or so. It ends up changing as time goes on, so it's not a perfect implementation or anything, but yeah. Once you get to the end of the game, it does this for all levels, where they're actually coming in with better gear, they're coming in with nicer stuff, and this actually ends up scaling up depending on a whole bunch of different situations. So like right here, this is a story fight, they've got some upgraded stuff, they've got the best stuff that they can reach at their current level. If you were to come back, like, let's say at 30 or so, because that's where this particular one ends up scaling up, he would end up having the Glam Rock with him, and all of them would end up having accessories. Basically, they're constantly updating the thing to match what you've brought along with you. So in this particular case, since we're kind of in the 26 range here, we don't necessarily have too many things on hand. This is kind of like right out of endgame. We've got some elemental options, we've got some upgraded gear, but we're not, swimming in this stuff. It's not absolutely everywhere. But yeah, you can go back. If you have characters that are alive in the story, they'll have unique dialogue in certain situations. So yeah, it's kind of a fun thing there. But point being, you end up seeing a lot more of this kind of like death mechanic ending up coming up, because many of the knights will be running around with things like phalanx, where they're basically locking you down for several turns in a row. In most cases, you're going to see that, if a unit gets knocked out, they're going to bleed out without help anyway. They don't really need the permadeath mechanic. All it's doing is giving you the option to essentially go up and revive them. You can either use stones to extend their timer more or less, or you can kind of just leave them as is, because in many cases reviving them isn't even necessarily a good choice. It might legitimately be better to just keep attacking. Until you've secured their general area, reviving them is not necessarily even that possible. It's kind of an interesting thing with how they design this game. Because, yeah, in most cases, if you end up running somebody out through their full extended movement range, you end up using a revive item, in most cases, they will get damaged, and the guy that they revived will end up getting knocked out in the process. So it's not necessarily always going to be the best move. It's not necessarily going to be something that you can do at long range. I believe 6 tiles is the maximum range you can actually do it from. And yeah, in most cases, since they're coming back at about 5-10% health, depending on what kind of items you used, well, they'll probably just get hit by the nearest archer and then just go right back down again, like I said. Cool thing about New Game Plus, by the way, if you have that character in your team already, you can actually have them use the just kind of use whatever equipment you wanted. And actually, just for fun, the other day, I decided to see what would happen if you tried to if you had recruit on a guest character in New Game Plus, and you sort of force controlled them just to see what would happen. So unfortunately, you can't convert people to the guest team. They do just convert to the player team. So I'm pretty sure the game's actual command in that thing is just, turn this to the player's faction. Which actually, a fun note on factions. I know we're kind of all over the place here, but just kind of a fun note on factions here that, yeah, if you're doing the intro and whatever else, you actually count as a neutral faction, and all kills gotten from all of the Zenobians count towards you. That's actually kind of applies generally as well, since pretty much any character deaths whatsoever are entirely blamed on you. So yeah, everything about the game is kind of just designed on a whole thing of everybody's judging you, and it kind of makes sense. I mean, you can tell, you literally have sections of the game where you tell people, hey, that totally was not us that did the whole, genocide thing over there. Maybe don't blame us for that. And they will absolutely still blame you for that because you were there. So it could just be, simplicity in programming for that particular one. I personally like to think that, it might have just been for that particular reason, but who knows. Actually, by the way, random note here, just because I just saw it come up. There's a trick you can do that's generally not too advised in terms of, just in terms of something that you really want to do that often, because it'll probably end up ruining some stuff for you. But the game does not, or the AI in general does not check for whether what their actual final damage will be. What they check for is what their damage could be. So, for example, if you have something like Phalanx on a Naked Knight, all the AI seeing is like, oh crap, I could do like 180 damage there with a frickin' knife. I'm gonna go do that, and they're not really seeing that they're doing like 20. So it's just it's kind of fun in that regard. All right. Just kind of curious, real quick. I want to go check what kind of skills Oz came with, because I keep avoiding the one thing that I keep trying to mention, which is that in the post game, which we're not quite there yet, in like the fully scaled up version of everything, once they've got their full skill lists and everything, all necromancers of all kinds will actually come with Condemn. So, for example, when you run to Moldova at the very entrance of the game, most people don't go back to redo that fight because, why would you? But you absolutely can, and, well, she'll end up having Condemn on her, so you more than likely won't be able to revive people. So it's just a fun note, Alright, what else? Oh, neat. The guide that I ordered for the 1,000 sub thing is, it's on its way. It's already halfway here, so looking forward to that. Looking forward to covering what kind of stuff we find in there, because there's still a lot of unknown mysteries about this game. While I'm still kind of rebuilding the list of interesting stuff after I accidentally overwrote it, there is a bunch of stuff that's kind of a complete unknown at this point. Like, for example, the whole prevailing element mechanic. I've made a few videos on the matter, but I'm holding off on doing the kind of like full end-all one of that whole thing. Because I'm hoping that maybe there will be something in the guide about it, because it's kind of an odd situation where, if you didn't know, prevailing element will actually work in reverse in some cases. So for For the basic elements, it works in absolute reverse. So you cast Earth, and Wind gets stronger while Earth gets weaker. So this basically means if you cast the same thing over and over and over, your particular thing is getting weaker. Now, I don't know if this is intentional, because this is across the board, with exception to Light and Dark. If we want to make a general assumption in terms of like how it would end up matching up with the story of the game and all that kind of thing, I mean, they do have several references in several of the items to some dude basically pissing off all of the main elemental gods. That being potentially part of what ends up causing some of the issues in the kind of background story of the game, while also basically stating that, okay, that like the main backers of everybody were either, you know, the holy or dark side. Everybody else was just kind of off in the background and or sulking for one reason or another. So it kind of makes me wonder if that was intentional or if it's actually a programming bug. So, you know, jury's still out on that. I will, like I said, I'll make a dedicated video on that particular thing with when the guide actually shows up, because I want to see what the exact wording of that thing is. Because I'm hoping there's some more, you know, official confirmation on that kind of thing. Because it's a very odd mechanic. To kind of briefly cover it again, you can potentially stack any element up to about 40 or so times, and then depending on what, just kind of like what stuff is in play at the time, it scales up differently. So like basic spells and stuff like that can get a bunch of extra damage added to the end of their attacks, whereas certain things, like certain situations, physical weapons will end up getting a pretty big bonus, but they will definitely get a reduction in their damage if the opposite element is around. Like for example, recently when I was going through Palace of the Dead on a solo run of one vision, there's the Redeemer, which is a holy hammer, and I figured, okay, fantastic choice. It's got a bonus against undead. It's essentially a light thing. Well, it's not classified as a light weapon, but it's relatively light. It's a one-hander anyway. You know, would still get access to a shield, so seemed fantastic. Was getting, you know, I think it was 284 damage on a ghost. So, not bad. Not bad for a one-hander. And, well, to make a long story short, that damage ended up scaling all the way down to 31 on that same ghost, because they kept casting Word of Pain over and over and over. And in most cases, like, I never even realized how much this was actually helping before. In most cases, you wouldn't really realize just how much of an effect it's having. That's why I love the mechanic so much, because it's so subtle. It's not really something that you can build for, you know. It's just kind of there doing its thing, and it's cool that it's there. So, like for example, when I was doing the original solo of the vanilla game here, I had no idea that this thing existed, but it suddenly makes a lot of stuff make more sense, because I have no clue how I was doing like 400 whatever damage with a frickin' spear. And like basically what ended up happening, again, just lucky discoveries and things, but basically the dark spear that I was using it specifically for its I think it was like a fear-proof bonus that it has. That was the only reason I had routed it in. I liked using Spiral Scourge, and I liked having a bunch of debuff immunities, and I wasn't really considering much beyond that. But yeah, sure enough, just going dark ended up working out pretty well on that one. Because yeah, I couldn't really understand why light stuff wasn't quite working too great there. Logically speaking, it makes perfect sense. Everything about this dang game, every mechanic that ends up coming up, every little thing that I end up looking into, everything that Rakes ends up finding in the code, whatever else, why does it all end up making sense in the end? It's so weird. God, this game. Anyway, so, other little kind of design decisions in terms of stuff that might have been carried over from FFT. I was originally just kind of going to go through the entirety of FFT's skill list and just kind of cover things in terms of like what became what. Like it's interesting how the Knight from FFT basically had its general purpose transferred over to the Hoplite and Juggernaut, or how you had stuff like the Geomancer that was built entirely out of original TO's kind of elemental tiles mechanic, which is still kind of here. It's kind of a stretch on the Geomancer, to be fair, but like pretty much all the passives got put in somewhere. I mean, Preempt just became its own class. or sorry, Hamido became its own class. It's like there's a billion different ways that could go. And then as soon as I started going down that list, well, that thing ended up going on for... Hell, I think I got up to an hour, and it was like, yeah, this is going to take way too long. So I'm going to try to find a shorter way to do that in the future. but yeah, most of that is there. Like stuff like speed save and whatever else, like anything that really affects speed was not in this one, but almost everything else was. What else? Well, they definitely didn't carry over the armor mechanic, that's for sure. Because the more that I think about it, it's one of those other decisions that that you can tell that they've been trying to figure out how to implement armor for a very long time. Because, oh, can we make that shot? Yeah, we might be able to make that shot. Because, yeah, back in original Ogre Battle, they were like, yeah, screw it, this is just part of the class, we don't have to think about it more than that. Kind of back when they were definitely more heavily inspired by things like just tabletop war games and things like that. You know, you didn't really have to worry too much about all the specifics. The class just kind of had themselves figured out. And then from there, they got more and more. They got more and more in depth with it. Like they tried to do an interesting thing when it came to the armor mechanic in FFT, where they basically said, okay, there's no defense, but the more armor you have, the more damage you take. Like this seems like a cool idea, and then it just kind of it seemed pretty basic, all things considered. But it was a cool idea, you know. At least it feels nice when you get your first night and it's like, oh man, this guy's packing all of the health. But yeah, you could tell that there were definitely some weird applications that you could do for that particular thing. It did the job. It was a very elegant system, but it wasn't very sophisticated. And so this one ends up coming around, and they're like, okay, let's try and build an actual armor mechanic this time. And I mean, it's not perfect by any means, but honestly, it's pretty unique as far as this stuff goes. Typically, just due to the number of factors and that can be flying around in an SRPG at any given time, usually you end up seeing that they don't really try. Like usually it's some kind of damage reduction mechanic or something like that. I think the closest I've seen to both believable and very elegant would probably be XCOM 2 there, where I mean, it's a system other games have done. It's just the first one that comes to mind. I don't really want to dive into the full history of that particular one. But anyway, yeah, she's a tougher one to save here, even getting towards the end game. Anyway, let's go ahead and Mantis Strike this guy. What I was getting at here is, they tried with the armor mechanic in this one, where it's just like it has some damage reduction factors, but it's more like a damage threshold system. Like the closest thing to a lot of mechanics in this one, to me, still feels like New Vegas, where they just kept trying all these weird little new mechanics all over the place. And damage threshold is a pretty solid system. I personally really like it. I know it's not, the perfect end-all, be-all of all things forever, but it's a very good feeling system, because it means that when you actually, play right, so to speak, you end up getting effective damage at all times, and then when you end up not doing damage, typically there's that thought of, okay, there's more that I could have done here. Again, it's not perfect, but it's cool, at least I feel anyway. So yeah, just kind of brief refresher if you aren't familiar with the armor mechanic in this one. Basically what it comes down to is just you have your stats that are checked, and then you have that defensive score. That's just more or less whose attack beats whose defense. And if it's severely beaten, you end up getting a bunch of penalties on your attack. If you end up actually beating it, you get a bunch of bonuses, which tends to cause those cases where you've got your endgame archers that manage to get their skills high enough to actually get past armor. Like, you might have noticed the difference here between everybody else running about 2 to 5 skills and then my archers having maximum rank, where they're actually getting effective damage through. Which is why they oftentimes are listed as being completely broken, despite technically having counters. Like, if there actually was a functioning multiplayer in this, I mean, you do have the AI mode and everything else, where you can have AI teams fight each other, or you can fight challenge teams and everything. The AI knows a lot of interesting tricks, but it doesn't really know how to bully archers that well. It's not one of the things that it just tends to do. When it does pull it off, it's pretty cool. I've definitely seen the AI, pull it off on more than one occasion, but it's not consistent enough at specifically trying to snipe out your archers and things. I feel like one thing they actually probably could have done to make that a little bit better was just not give them access to heavy armor, and then the AI would just target them more. But then I would assume it probably would just turn into archers always shooting other archers, so they're really... I say this a lot, but this game was never going to be fully balanced. They did the best they could. Like with the One Vision mod, they're definitely doing a lot more in terms of matching it to modern sensibilities and things, but for the tabletop type situation they were going for with this one, I think they did about as good as they could have. But any dang ways, moving on. So, kind of lost my my train of thought now. Alright, so in terms of the death mechanics and things like that, I think we covered everything that I really wanted to cover there. Would be curious to hear stories from people in terms of when it might have eventually, or it might have actually come up for you in the past. Because I feel like most folks that got through this either had no casualties or like up to 2 on their first round, and then once they get into New Game Plus, it's like, oh, there's way more potential to lose people. You have characters literally coming in with moves that will slice a like an entire heart off them, or kill them instantly if they only have one, or you have people coming in with Condemn, or you've just got way more cliffs in the DLC maps. There's a lot more that can potentially kill off units. However, by that point, you also have a lot more replacements. So, I mean, it's interesting. But anyway. I think that's about all that we're going to cover on this one. I'm looking forward to doing that prevailing element bit, because yeah, that guide should be here soon. So whatever kind of interesting stuff we find in there, we'll find in there, and I think we might have some fun discoveries. But until then, let me know what other questions you guys have. Like I've said before, pretty much everything's a mechanic here, so I mean, I can go at length on just about anything that you're curious about. So have yourself a good one. Take care, and see you next time. Bye.